Hello. I'm not dead. But unfortunately, it's been another 6 months. But I'm planning to put out a second video alongside this one. Both are going to be about the creation of my game's main playable character, Nyx. This part is going to cover her conception, the thought process behind it, and the creation of the model itself. The idea behind Nyx formed from the need for a character that made sense to be able to survive one of the most important elements of my game. That being the ridiculous, over-the-top injury system, where you could go as far as to lose your entire head and then snap it on no problem. As far as I know, no person in the real world can survive something like that. Unless you can, which, if that's the case, please contact me on my Discord, I'd love to study you. But until then, I've had to come up with a character design that supported such an injury system, which is how I ended up giving her various undead or afterlife related features. Starting with the face, things like zombies could survive the kinds of injuries she'll be put through, so I gave her deathly pale skin and an emotionless gaze. Vampire teeth, because vampires tend to be damn near close to mortal, and demon horns, because those are cool and vaguely related. However, at the same time, I wanted her to be, actually pleasant to look at, hence the big ol' eyes and a carrot-shaped mouth. As for the hair, well, it didn't really have that much thought put into it, I just drew whatever, but I eventually swapped it out for a big ol' mess instead. I think the scruffiness suits her. Then I moved on to the body. My anatomy skills were and still not the best, so please excuse it if she looks weird to you here. The game's world is supposed to be based on optimistic futurism, with a twist being that it treats the typical fantasy world as ancient medieval history, so there's some magic. But in the game's modern day, most reasons to use magic are superseded by safer, easier, more accessible, and more convenient technological methods, which is why I had first struggled to come up with a design for the body I liked. I first tried to incorporate the ancient fantasy aspect by drawing some weird markings on the body, with the idea that her ability to sustain insane injuries was sourced from them in some way. So, God, I should leave one of those in. I'm gonna leave that in. Don't leave me talking about how I'm gonna leave that in. With the idea that her ability to sustain insane injuries was sourced from them in some way. And so that the markings weren't hidden by default, there were patches on the clothing that revealed it. The outfit was also given markings and runes, because magic. It wasn't really that well thought out, but I had to start somewhere. Iterating off the first design, I felt that it was very bland, just a suit with some marks. So I fumbled around drawing some shapes onto her until I had the idea of adding a belt and a little hanging thing on the clothing. Not sure what it's called. A cloak? A drape? I don't know. It was at this point I started being able to pick out the things I liked. Something hanging off, straps, sharp lines, and the weird gloves. These are supposed to be an inversion of drawing gloves, meant to be made up shooting gloves. I feel that these do a good job at making the hands pop while being more unique than just having, fingerless gloves or something. But with the design of the body as a whole, I felt it was too noisy. And I also decided on a backstory for her, one that this current outfit didn't fit all too well. See, her backstory is one of a target, a victim, hunted due to her gene line being the product of an ancient war, one that people do not like being reminded of. Her ability to sustain terrible injuries was an intentional feature meant for combat. After all, if you can tank being gunned down or blown up and just put yourself back together, it's safe to say you're more likely to win a fight than one that isn't able to survive something like that. And her appearance is made to be creepy to invoke the same lack of empathy one would have over killing a spider versus killing, a ladybug. So I thought it would make more sense to make the outfit reflect one that struggles. Ragged clothes stained with bloodstains and prior injuries, a hood to conceal appearance, and a weapon equipped at all times to defend oneself. But it turned out to have the same problems of the other two designs. It managed to be both noisy and bland. It may have had the deepest backstory for the design, but it doesn't matter if it isn't a good design in the first place. So I sacrificed a bunch of the outfit's story for the sake of a visually appealing, readable design. This is a game character after all, so readability is important, and design can have the deepest story imaginable, but all goes out the window if the design is completely overlooked in the first place. Even if the design doesn't make that much contextual sense, people don't really tend to actually look into that or care until after they're already interested in the design, which at that point for most people, you've already won them over. Plus, with all my designs, I completely overlooked a key detail about the game. It takes place on an alien planet. So none of my designs even make any sense. Nyx would be in a spacesuit, but that completely sacrifices everything about her. Can't see her face very well due to the helmet, and either the horns would have to be cut off, covered with something, or it would make even less sense to have them protruding out of the helmet or something. So I ended up completely prioritizing the coolness factor over sense, and ended up producing this, which as you could probably tell is a lot closer to the design I ended up running with. And I still like this one, might even use it as an alternate skin in the future. But due to a change in the art style from a low poly, sharp pixels kind of art style to instead a cel shaded Risk of Rain inspired art style and a random shower thought, I ended up starting over one last time, creating the start of the final design for Nyx. But wait, something's off, right? The scarf looks way more pathetic than it does in the final model. I didn't get that idea until weeks of sitting on this design doing absolutely nothing with it, because I felt that while I was close to fully satisfied with the design, that there was something missing. I didn't know what that was though. Asking around, someone suggested that I exaggerate the scarf a bunch, and so I did that, sadly sacrificing the hood in the process. Yet another aspect of the story gone. But then, at least visually with this, I knew that it was ready. And so I got to work on the actual model. In Blender, after I decide the height for the character, I start making a block out, arranging a bunch of primitive shapes, which in comparison to a 2D drawing is like planning out the proportions of the piece. This will be used as a base for sculpting, where we hack away at the arranged shapes to refine them into a form that roughly resembles the concept art. This is also where I ended up adding missing details, such as how the boots, knee guards, and straps look, things that my drawing skills fall short on, and the parts that aren't visible in the single front-facing perspective that the concept art has. Then I used vertex painting to put in some color so that I could get a rough preview of what the model will look like. This all takes quite a while, but outside of some of the larger details, we could be quite rough and manage with any imperfections, as it's far from a usable model, because what we need to do after is retopologize, which, to put simply, is to recreate the entire sculpt polygon by polygon, which can, like the sculpting phase, take a very long time. You first start with making the most important details with as little polygons as possible, as it's much easier to add new polygons via cuts than to remove extra polygons that you don't need. And it's much less time consuming to add one big polygon than several smaller ones. The important parts of the model are parts where things bend, stick out, or deform. Failure to get the right parts in now would mean that those important details would be lost, or your model will look weird when animated. Then, it's a matter of filling in the gaps, though it's not that simple. Your arms, for example, are not just purely cylindrical tubes that never twist, so we do need more polygons in those types of spaces than one would think. After that, it's time for the roughest part, the hair, which can be very challenging. But if your hair is kept simple and neat, it shouldn't be hard. My hair is not simple or neat. Regardless, you start by making a hair strand via Blender's curves, and then you just duplicate, bend, duplicate, bend, duplicate, bend, until you have a head fully covered in hair. Select all of it and convert it to a mesh. If your hair is simple, you could probably just add seams and leave it at that. But, like I said, my hair is not simple, but I really like how it looks. So instead of compromising, I had to go in and manually cull every single polygon that was covered by other hair strands of the head. Predictably, this took forever. I hated it, but it was worth it. This marks the completion of the shape of the model. Now it's time to get it ready for texturing. Unfortunately, you can't just slap a PNG on it and call it a day. So I have to go around the model marking seams, which the easiest way to understand this process is to think of how, like, a plushie has to have seams. Within the context of modeling, this simply determines how the model is broken apart to fit on a 2D image, and use this texture that's currently on Nyx to preview how an actual texture would behave on the character. You want to minimize how much this texture deforms when curving around the model, because any deforms on this preview texture means that it will deform on your actual texture, which does not look good. You also want to make sure that the most important details have the smallest pattern, as that means that the texture would have the highest resolution at those parts. This requires sacrificing resolution at the less important parts of the mesh. After all, it has to fit on one image. You might also notice that placing seams means the texture will cut off. This can be a problem if the seam isn't placed properly. The best places to put seams are where there's a sharp transition between colors, like on the edges of these straps. This uses the sharp cutoff to your advantage, as there will be no pixels there between either side. If you can't do that, the next best thing is to put it in places that are less likely to be seen, such as between the legs or at the back corner of the fingers. After that, I took the colors I used for vertex paint and ignored it entirely. At least in some cases. Even while finishing up the model, I'm still open to tweaking parts of it as I see fit. This is why it's best to have backups and prioritize non-destructive methods of working that can be easily undone or worked under. Which is why I textured the model via an add-on named Yuku Paint. It's tough to work with, but it allows the complex layering that most 2D drawing software provides, so I highly recommend it if you don't have a better option. After the basic coloring was done, I noticed that the model looked very flat, so I added another layer on top and baked ambient occlusion onto it. This gives the model some nice shading, making sharp or overlapping parts of the model stand out, and making all that effort on the little details actually worth it. And here is the result. The actual modeling specifically took I think about 2 weeks. A lot was cut short. For one, I spent like 10 sessions working purely on the hands, and it was a lot of tweaking to get the anatomy to a good level. Then there were a bunch of technical issues getting the ambient occlusion bake to work, or wrangling Yucca Paint to do what I wanted to, but yeah, I think it turned out neat. What do you think? Next video, I'll be going through the process of rigging her, animating her, and getting her from Blender to Godot. Thanks for watching, and remember, you can try the currently available prototype version out right now on my itch.io page, and that you can become a member to get access to newer private builds. Thank you to my current members, Squeak, MaxGamer134, Bubble, Street Bozo, Yawn, a random scav, Mr. Big Pika, and Cremation. See ya in part 2!